Hello, and welcome to this Progress webinar. My name is Dan Dolph. I'm on the marketing team here at Progress, and today I'm your webinar host. We have a great topic for you today. We'll look at how you can embrace your future and grow through digital during this pandemic disruption. So I'm excited to announce our featured speaker today, Ted Schadler. Ted is a vice president and principal analyst at Forrester Research. In that role, Ted serves digital business professionals. He has 33 years of experience in the technology industry, analyzing the effects of disruptive technologies on experiences and on business strategy and architecture. His research agenda focuses on digital transformation, experience-led transformation, commerce and digital experience service providers, and the future of services. Ted is also the co-author of two books, The Mobile Mindshift, Engineer Your Business to Win in the Mobile Moment, and Empowered, Unleash Your Employees, Energize Your Customers, and Transform Your Business. I'll turn it over to Ted.
Thank you, Dan. Hi, everybody. Welcome. So happy you're here with us today. So I'm excited because this topic is important. The pandemic has been an unbelievable game changer for all of us at home, at work, in our professional lives, in our society, frankly. So how has it affected how you operate? And what have you learned from this that you can apply going forward as you grow beyond the disruption into the future state that we all know, hope, believe is coming? I'd like to kind of start by celebrating where we've been and what we've been through. We I think, were our very best selves during the crisis, back particularly in the spring when things were really uncertain. We moved quickly to protect customers and employees, working from home, serving customers digitally, hands-free, contact-free. We adapted how we worked to serve customers digitally. And we created new offerings and experiences for customers. Think about curbside pickup as an example, or the amazing work going on to create safe eating spaces in restaurants. We also broke down barriers to decision-making. We came together across departments to identify what needed to be done, and we did it together. And we worked in an agile fashion. IT, marketing, business, operations, whatever groups had to come together, came together to address the need and solve the problems. And we were successful. We were more successful when we already had in place strategic partnerships with cloud providers and service providers that were strategic partners, helping us execute against this opportunity and certain requirement, this demand, this need. And so this to me is as examples of behaving well, working differently, taking advantage of strategic relationships to really solve these very, very important challenges that the pandemic created. So I think the pandemic created this burning platform. If we weren't convinced before, we are now convinced that we need to move faster in a more agile way, to work differently and better together, across departments internally and also with our technology partners. And there are some fabulous stories that came out of this. And I hope we're telling these stories to our grandchildren someday. Hertz, for example, made cars available to first responders in New York City, first responders, nurses in particular, to get from where they lived to work. So critical, and they made those actually available for free. A lot of things had to happen to accomplish that. Another example, this is out of France, is making personal protective gear available through a marketplace. And this was then allowed the hospital system to plug in and order PPE, to get what they needed quickly. And that a lot of folks had to come together to do that. Just an amazingly agile marketplace creation. Another example, which I think is personally, I experienced this, was at Walgreens and other pharmacies where the pharmacies were open because they were critical, but the stores were not. So we have these, pharmacy pass-throughs, if you like. And so the Walgreens was able to identify which packages in their store on their shelves were small enough to fit through the drive-through. And then the pharmacists were the ones that went around and collected things and made them available to customers that had ordered online. So again, just a an amazing execution against a really challenging problem. And then State Street Bank supported remote employees very, very directly, sometimes shipping them equipment that was secured end-to-end to work at home, and creating security protocols with VPNs and other things to make sure that employees were productive and safe at home, but also operating in a secure way. So just some amazing contributions that people in IT, people in operations, people in business marketing came together to solve these really interesting and complex challenges. So I believe that we learned some things. We accomplished some amazing things that have lasting value. And to kind of summarize it, you took advantage of the resources and the capabilities available from technology and service partners to move quickly at scale. So you had identified resources, you were able to move quickly. You worked across departmental boundaries to plan and execute with a shared vision for success. The mission was clear. And you tapped into the energy and the power, the coordinated power that comes from that shared commitment and those strategic partner relationships. So the question really is, was that a one and done? Was it only a pandemic phenomenon? I don't think it was. And the CIO of this manufacturing company agrees that COVID wrote the business case. Our future is digital. So this company may have been a laggard before, but now they are on board. They understand that to do omni-channel selling, for example, in a B2B scenario, they need to be digital. So just a very, I think, powerful signal that what we learned we can apply going forward. We can apply it to grow through this pandemic recession and beyond. So at Forrester, we collect a huge amount of data. Every year we run a poll, probably not the word I should use. We are going to run a poll for you in a moment. But every year we run a survey, the business decision makers and technology decision makers that make decisions to bring in services, third-party services. And as part of that, we ask a bunch of questions about digital transformation. So for example, we can assess digital maturity using this questionnaire. So one of the questions we asked was, how has your organization's investments in digital transformation changed during the COVID-19 pandemic? And this data is just back 2 weeks ago, 44% of respondents of enterprises in North America and Europe said that their investments in digital transformation were growing, sometimes as much as 50%. 20% said they were actually shrinking. They were making fewer investments. When you break this down by sector, by industry, you see that the sectors that are really under stress may be reducing their spend, but every other sector is increasing their spend. And again, at Forrester, we've done a lot of research about this. There are many, many more companies that are adapting and growing than there are in survival mode. So this to me is a dramatic signal, an indication of the fact that this pandemic has created the awareness and the investment strategy for digital transformation. We'd like to actually now run a poll for you to ask how your organization's investment in digital transformation has changed because of the pandemic. So let's get that poll up. So when you think about your own commitment to whether it's cloud journey or investment in digital platforms, perhaps you're overhauling your commerce experience, your customer care experience to use more digital. Has it increased? Has it decreased? Or has it stayed the same? Okay, there we go. Wow, your results are even more dramatic than the results we had from our data set. 63% of you have increased your investments and effort in digital transformation, while only 5% of you have decreased, and 33% have stayed the same. That is dramatic. That is like a complete pivot toward digital. What I think we should realize is that, maybe we were change agents in our companies. Maybe we were already on board with this, driving it as hard as we can. But what's happened here is that the executive staff, the C-suite, the senior executive managers, the middle managers, everybody was shocked by the system, by the pandemic, and has now realized that digital business transformation it's not optional. Whereas in our data, I mentioned maturity. In 2019, it was about 15% were digitally mature, and everybody else was kind of an intermediate or, in fact, a beginner. 49% were beginners. Whereas in the 2020 data, which is the data I showed you a few minutes ago, 19% are digitally advanced. So that's from 1 in 7 companies being advanced to almost 1 in 5 companies being advanced in just 1 year. That is a dramatic acceleration. And the number of beginners has also shrunk way down from 49%. So that's, again, a signal, an indication that just like you, the rest of the industry has realized that digital transformation is no longer optional. So, okay, I do a lot of work in digital transformation. What does it mean? How can we take advantage of what we learned? How can we scale what we've mastered in the spring and apply it going forward? And that's kind of the purpose of my topic for the day today. So one is that I think senior leadership has realized what you probably already know, which is that transformation and innovation go together to transform business, meaning to reinvent business through this digital lens, and that they are core competencies. This is not like a one and done. This is an ongoing investment in flexibility and in growth. So it's unlike days of yore, where tech was like a project, tech is now like a transformative agent, and it's widely recognized as a transformative agent. So how can we create a model for scaling, for executing against that opportunity that applies across the entire company and is not just stuck in one little part or another? Well, I think it is important to recognize that technology is at the center of that transformation. It is the enabler. It's the empowerer, if you like. We've got modern applications that very, very often run in the cloud, and they're built in a modern way. So very API-centric, for example. A lot of reusability of core code and core data comes from that. Hybrid multi-cloud. We're going to have multiple versions of cloud. Some's going to be public, some's going to be private. We're not going to have a single cloud usually. We're going to get software from folks that run in different clouds. So we're going to be living in this hybrid multi-cloud world. There's a lot of value creation that comes from artificial intelligence and machine learning. A lot of the business value being created, including some of the examples that I was sharing earlier, the marketplace, for example, on PPE, is right there in the data sets. So AI, ML, huge enablers of new business value. And then lastly here, I want to draw attention to digital platforms. So what platforms are we building for internal use and for customer-facing use that are really platform-centric, not just a piece of software, but a piece of software that we can use in multiple ways, embed out through APIs, for example, out to our clients. Maybe it's a marketplace. So tech is at the center for sure. And the impact is value defining. In other words, the ability to use technology to transform business creates new value. And here's how to do it. First, you have to start with customers' experiences and what they're trying to accomplish. It could be an employee as well. It could be a business customer, it could be a consumer. So you start outside in. You start with a needs state, as my colleague Julie Ask likes to say. What do they need? Because then we're going to build something that will fit the purpose. Second is you need to lay the foundations and the engine, the investment engine for continuous improvement, investment in experiences and products and growth. So your way of working is one of those foundations. Your strategic partnerships form some of the infrastructure, if you like, for that continuous improvement, continuous innovation, continuous transformation. And to do that, you need to have strategic partnerships in place. So whether you have fewer, bigger relationships or you have deeper relationships, this is an area where I think you're doing a lot of work, I am doing a lot of work to really understand what creates that strategic alignment, that value alignment that would turn a vendor into a partner or a service provider into a strategic co-innovation partner. And so we're going to explore that a little bit here. Tech plays this critical enabling role. And if you think back, like to the recession in 2008, 2009, a lot of tech got spent. That's what I wrote Empowered, by the way. There was a lot of shadow IT. Employees bringing in their own phones and people using cloud without IT's permission. That's how Salesforce got in the door, you may remember. And the challenge was that IT was told to go shut it down, save money and shut it down. It was not a good conversation. IT became the department of no. There was a lot of rogue spending outside of IT. It was not a value-aligned conversation. And so at Forrester, we've been doing quite a bit of work on the future fit enterprise. And part of that is understanding how to have a different business technology conversation. And to do that, we need to acknowledge that there are multiple stakeholders, there are multiple budgets, and there's also different reasons to invest in technology. The first reason is that the technology is foundational to business. This is almost squarely in the IT budget. It is absolutely being transformed by journey to cloud. And this anchors the operations, the safety, and the resilience of the business. So very, very important, mostly an IT responsibility. And the next layer up, though, the technology is truly differentiating. You think about your customer-facing platforms. You think about omni-channel experiences. You think about things that your customers recognize as important. And here, the budgets are shared. It's not an IT budget. Very often, it's a 50-50% kind of budget where it might be held by marketing, or it might be held by a product line of business or an operations executive. These technologies are critical. Most of them are cloud, and they differentiate how a company presents itself to the world. And so here, the role of IT is quite different. IT needs to vet the providers, needs to make sure that the solutions are secure, but also needs to grant permission and runway for people to create technologies that are in fact differentiating. And you see a lot of investment here in OT, not just in IT as well. So in operating technologies. The third layer we call the agility layer or the creative layer. This is the layer that empowers every team to take advantage of technology to serve their customer, serve their employee in a new and better way. And so here the budgets are almost all held out in the business or in the operations group, and it's about 10%, by the way, of IT spend. Foundational is about 50%. Differentiating is, say 30 to 40%. Those are rough numbers. But the agility technology is a place where IT does play a role, but they don't say no. They say, look, here are the frameworks, it's not just the approved list, but here is your process for bringing a new technology in. As you're in your pilot mode, we're not going to worry about it. As we start to commercialize it, now IT is going to get more involved. So there's a different business technology conversation when you think about what the purpose of the tech is, who has responsibility for it, and who owns the budget for it. And so we're not going to go back to the old way where IT controls all the budget. Ain't going to happen. What is going to happen is a much more sophisticated and nuanced conversation about the role of technology. We call that innovation through ecosystems. In other words, you're going to bring in lots of tech, most of it cloud, that lives out there in the ecosystem. And you're going to take advantage of the investments those vendors are making in their offerings because they are innovating on their behalf and on your behalf. You are taking advantage of their investments because they want you to buy more of their stuff, long story short. While you will focus on your core, what you are good at, and you'll orchestrate all of those providers out there that can help you move quickly and create differentiated value, you will orchestrate those ecosystems for value and for agility. And so it's kind of a formal concept that we put a formal definition around. Innovation through ecosystems happens when you and others actively collaborate with your cloud, software, and service providers. Actively collaborate, not just take what they got, but make sure they're building what you need, that you are aligned on the outcomes, that you have shared purpose. And that gets written into a contract ultimately. Be value aligned through common purpose and financial incentives. So this kind of takes the idea of an ecosystem, which is kind of a vague notion, and tries to make it a much more specific concept, where you are buying something from a provider that's in your cloud ecosystem, and they're giving you something such that there's strong value alignment between what you're achieving and what they're providing. So if you think about infrastructure as a service, it's very value aligned because we've got pay for use. You'll only pay for what you consume. In software, it's much more value aligned today than it used to be in the old days of license, because we have the ability to incrementally increase the value we're deriving from software as we use more of it. There's also pretty good value alignment between a service provider and a cloud vendor or infrastructure or a business service provider, because both sides benefit, right? The provider benefits, the vendor benefits. So the value alignment there is pretty good. There's better and better value alignment between the enterprise and a service provider using outcome-based pricing, essentially, is where we're headed here. So it's not just time and materials, might be fixed price, but more and more outcomes-based or outcomes-aligned pricing. So this creates much more shared incentive, motivation to use the resources of the cloud for transformation. And it applies everywhere. Let's think about how you would execute this. Number one, you want to figure out who the strategic partners are that you're going to essentially outsource responsibility to run that piece of software for you. In other words, a SaaS provider or a PaaS provider is going to invest in their offering that you will take advantage of. You'll be able to move quickly because you can deploy it immediately, and you'll take advantage of their innovation pipeline. You're going to need to orchestrate, as I said earlier, for agility and for differentiation. In other words, you need to pull all the parts together to create a unique and differentiated capability. That can be hard to do because there might be 100,000 parts out there. A lot of value and capability is available over the internet. So you need a way to assemble an architecture, a technology architecture to deliver a business value that requires pulling those parts together. We call that orchestration. And then the third piece of it is, because we are running this rather complex system of providers, vendors, us, we need to operate with full visibility. We need to make sure we've instrumented it. We are seeing the data in real time or on a dashboard so that we can find the insights, we can optimize it, and we can make sure that we are continuously improving it, that we're up and running so we have resilience. So these three things go together. Identify vendors, software, cloud partners, identify service partners. That's the outsourcing for speed and innovation. Orchestrate, pull the parts together to create differentiation and do it quickly. This is not go off in waterfall. This is agile development. And then operate, because you've instrumented it for visibility, for data and insights to make sure you're running well, you have resilience, and you can improve it over time. That's how innovation through ecosystems works. It applies everywhere. It applies in omni-channel commerce. So moving beyond a siloed digital or store or phone or whatever into omni-channel, where you've got core systems that apply across all of your selling channels. Same would be true in customer care, across all of your service delivery channels. That's omni-channel. It applies in digital customer journeys. So you want to onboard somebody, well, you want to make it easier for them, painless, simple. So whatever that journey is, you want to make sure that the customer is going to get a seamless experience. So innovation applies there across departments, because a lot of times the journey gets stuck in a department. Think about approving a purchase. You don't want to get stuck there. You want to make sure it sails right through appropriately, and that requires innovation through ecosystems. It also applies in building new products and services, new business platforms. So there's a lot of investment here and a lot of opportunity to do it better, because we now understand the value that comes in over the internet, over the cloud, via the ecosystem. So to do this, you really need to think about changing your relationship with your key providers. You need to adopt what we call co-innovation partnerships. And by co-innovation, it's kind of what it sounds like. We don't want to just set and forget. We don't want to just say, oh, well, they're good at that, so we'll use them. You want to actually make bets on providers, vendors, providers of all kinds, that have an investment strategy that's aligned with your needs. And that means they need to know what your needs are. It means you need to have some skin in the game. So when you think about co-innovation, we want to move the value exchange, which might mean the price, to the center of the relationship. And so this is kind of a different model than the old model of software licenses or RFP-based service engagements. This is more of a continuous relationship. And one thing that happens here is that you're going to ask your providers to assume more risk, because they're running bigger swaths of your code or your data or your business process for you. So they're going to assume more risk, but they're going to be rewarded more based on outcomes. You're going to give them some upside for doing a good job, doing a great job, and continually improving it. You're going to need to also put some skin in the game. You as a CIO, as a CMO, as a CDO, as a CFO, you're going to need to be involved in that program of transformation to co-invest, to co-create, and particularly to co-govern. You need to have a governance model that matches executives to executives, delivery people to delivery people, and of course, account people to economic buyers. But that executive relationship is where we're going to sort of manifest this co-innovation relationship. And then lastly, when you create something meaningful and valuable, that might be yours as an enterprise, but it also might be something that a provider could take advantage of. So for example, if you're working with a SaaS provider and they are helping you with a unique architecture for your business, putting their parts together for you, you're creating something valuable together. Now, you're going to get the advantage of it, but maybe they should get the advantage of it as well. And maybe there's a mechanism for that to happen. Where you see this happen the most is in these large deals, where a company is going to outsource a big chunk of their core, like records keeping, if we want to think about a recent example. Records keeping is a core competency, it's internal, but if it's locked away in the back office, that's not making a lot of money. If we rehost on Amazon, we can make it available and offer it to other companies. That's an example of creating new value in intellectual property. So we're seeing that more and more here as co-innovation moves value to the center of the relationship. Now look, none of this works without a different trust relationship. If you're going to treat a vendor as a arm's length, squeeze them as hard as you can, forget about it. It's not going to happen. We need to create a model where the vendor and the providers are investing on your behalf as well as their behalf, where there's a shared trust environment. And so we need to think about what it means to establish trust. Well, we need to identify that common purpose. Why are you in it? Why are we in it? What are our goals? You need to establish norms and processes. So if something goes off the rails, you need to get it back on the rails. And you need to build in escape valves that let you escalate up to that executive sponsorship that we're asking for. Now, this is not just like, feel-good stuff. You can actually mechanize this. You could actually build this into how you operate. For example, and we call this transparency. So transparency creates the mechanism to maintain trust and align work, that you define your objectives and key results so that everybody that's participating knows what they are contributing. That's true in IT and in marketing and business and operations and product owners. It's also true between you and your vendors and service provider partners, that you're identifying what the contributions are and the objectives and key results. You're going to create open sharing systems so you know where you are against this goal, this outcome. So you know progress against a goal. So when you think about agile development, this is something that keeps us on track with agile, with sprints, for example. And you are going to then track progress against those objectives. So everybody knows where they are. Is so-and-so behind? Well, we need to invest more or help them catch up. If this part of the organization is not contributing everything they need, we need to make sure that they are on board with what we're trying to accomplish. We want to share where we're at and be very visible about that. So dashboards are a big, big part of this. And then lastly, we want to make sure there's value alignment, and we need to write that into a contract ultimately. The assurance of outcomes codified in a contract. And so we're seeing more and more outcome-based pricing. We're seeing, as I said earlier, a need to and a desire and a willingness to have a commitment to a shared executive governance and to have much more regular check-ins. It's not a set and forget, it's a continuous improvement relationship. And that means you have a regular set of check-ins. So in one example, we have quarterly executive roadmap sessions where executives from both sides get together every quarter and figure out what's going to be the priority for the next quarter. Then on the ground, as we're actually building things, we have weekly or bi-weekly, usually, kind of sprint definition and agreement road mapping. And then on the real ground, on the daily work, there are daily sprints and stand-ups. That's an example of creating value alignment against this shared outcome. All right, well, we have just a few more thoughts to share here before we open up to your questions. So in fact, this is my last slide before we open up to your questions. But when you think about what your goals are for transformation, when you think about the role and the impact of technology in it, when you think about the role of a service provider in helping bring that technology to life through value orchestration, you need to, I think, take a step back and ask yourself, what role do we want our technology and service partners to play? Are we going to just hand it over to them and hope they do a great job? Are we going to work together to build the business case, which is what you should do, in my view? Are you going to be identifying those outcomes that are their revenue outcomes, their expense reduction outcomes, their agility outcomes, to build the business case around business metrics and success metrics that are irrefutable, that all sides can see and understand, all parties can get their head wrapped around? So it's not an RFP. It's not like let's do it all, write the RFP and send it out and then bid it out for lowest price. No, it's about what is the business case for growth? What is the business case that allows us to align all parties against that common objective? Another very important thing I mentioned, and you all believe, I'm sure, is the importance of the cloud in this. The cloud is the place, it's sort of the infinite resource. We can get everything we need from the cloud. And when you think about digital disruption of, say, 10 years ago, startups did almost nothing themselves. They relied on cloud providers to do almost everything. Now, incumbent enterprises that are transforming are doing the same thing. They're saying, what is the least we can do and the most we can pull in from partners to accomplish our goal, to differentiate our business? And so really take stock of your journey to cloud. The cloud will become the enabler, the agile enabler, the scaling opportunity, the platform delivery mechanism. So think about what your strategy is for journey to cloud. And best practice here definitely is to start with a business need that is funded, like omnichannel commerce is a good example, but then to make sure when you're replatforming, when you are establishing the infrastructure for that, that you're taking advantage of cloud and they're actually giving back. You're taking some of the savings that come from moving from on-prem to cloud, for example, and you're putting that back into the engine so you can invest more in that cloud transformation. So journey to cloud is a super important part of this. And then lastly, when you're thinking about your business and your model, there are kind of two questions I would encourage you to ask. The first is, how can you take what you're good at and make it better for your customers? We call that being customer obsessed at Forrester. In fact, it's our entire strategy. So being customer obsessed means not that you do things at a loss for customers, but that you think about what your customers need and you lever up what differentiates you and the capabilities you're bringing to do more and more and more and more for those customers. So an example of this would be moving from a transaction pricing model to a subscription pricing model for your services, for your products. That's an example of that. So that's one key area where you can lever up your competency. The other area is to think about what are you doing that's really commodity, but you need it. And if it's commodity, but you need it, what you want to do is you want to create leverage in that by consolidating, rationalizing, simplifying, porting to cloud, almost certainly, API enabling, so you can use that capability that's kind of commodity, but you have to have it in multiple ways inside your own company. And then some of those will be interesting as business platforms for other customers. In other words, you might, like that records keeping example I had, they did it first for themselves, but their goal is to sell records keeping to other wealth management companies. So they started, it's commodity, not very important in terms of what customers recognize, have to have it. So number one, consolidate, rationalize, make it work. Number two, sell it to somebody else. And so I actually believe that digital transformation is going to be the largest replatforming of business, re-engineering of industries that we've ever seen in my work, in my professional life. And this COVID thing was the kick in the pants we needed to get going. People are on board, learn valuable lessons. We want to build on those lessons to innovate through ecosystems, to build strategic relationships, to journey to cloud, and to unlock the value that's buried in your core systems, your core data, your core capabilities. Do as little as you can do yourself and bring in as much value from your partners as you possibly can. I believe that's how you will grow through this phase that we're in now and define the future of your personal success as a business, as a professional, and also your corporate and organizational success. So that's kind of the story I wanted to lay on you, and hopefully it's generated a lot of really interesting questions. Dan's going to come back in and help us kind of walk through some of those questions. So thanks a lot. Over to you, Dan, to lead us forward.
Thanks so much, Ted. That was great. So we do have some questions coming in, but for our attendees out there, this is your chance to ask them. So shoot them over now, and we should have a chance to get to everything. So the first one here is orchestrating with potential small ecosystem partners is made impossible by our IT's very risk-averse approach. Is this unique for us, or is the security card often used to defend incumbent software solutions?
Well, that's a complicated question. A lot of parts in that one. Let's unpack it a little bit. So, look, I think a lot of organizations are hampered by their procurement processes, hampered in the sense that they were created in an era that doesn't reflect the continuous improvement, continuous transformation that we are now in. And again, that's very much cloud enabled. And so those procurement models around risk, around trying to sort of front load risk, if you like. So we want to get all the risk out we can by having a really rigidly defined RFP and contract. That is not well suited to transformation. Because in transformation, the outcomes are somewhat uncertain. You know what your goals are, but you don't always know that it's a straight line to get there. So in that situation, I would say you want to find places in your company where there is a willingness to spend outside of procurement initially, or to bring procurement along to play the vital role they play, but to establish a new protocol for their job. And this is hard to do. I'm not saying that you on the ground can easily do this, but we are seeing more and more CFOs get involved in hiring sourcing managers that then also apply to procurement. And so we're seeing a transition start to happen here that will up-level procurement's role to not just be a cost cutter and a sort of a risk mitigator, but also an enabler of transformation. Now, for you specifically on the ground, what you're talking about, I would say that it's been happening outside of IT for a long time. So business will go buy something, procurement is cut out of it, and it gets rolled out in the wash, if you like. So find a business sponsor that's willing to go that extra mile to bring in the creative solution that you identified, and then they can go to battle with the CFO or sourcing or procurement as needed, so you don't have to fight that battle yourself. Bring your business partner into that conversation. And those techniques definitely work.
Thanks, Ted. Next one is, seems like shared client vendor value risk model cycles have been envisioned multiple times over the past 20 years. Is this finally changing? Do you have explicit examples? Are there models, i.e. materials to point to, that a client can use to assess risk?
Yeah, again, it's a complex question. There are plenty of examples. They almost all have a business outcome flavored to them. The large deals you see announced, not every day, but certainly every week, between service providers and clients, or between major vendors and clients, enterprises, will signal what's happening here, that it is in fact changing. The kind of ability to scale that up across more and more parts of your relationship is going to be where the challenge lies. So when you mention risk specifically, there is, I believe, a flawed model for managing risk, which, if you think about the old days where you would, for example, buy a piece of software and you would hope that it would work, you would create an RFP and you would bring in some implementer, and you try to manage all of that risk up front through a rigid RFP and a contracting process, often failed. It certainly created an arm's length set of relationships, and there's plenty of failures to write about, to know about, that we could reference. The thing about it is you can't manage all the risk up front. You have to manage risk along the way. And so this is where CFOs and where sourcing professionals play a really vital role, to think about how do you manage risk along the way. So for example, let's say you get started and you need to course correct because you put something out there and it didn't work. Your customer said, well, I don't want that. Well, whose fault is that? Is that the vendor's fault? Is that the service provider's fault? Is it your fault? I would say it is because you didn't necessarily start with an MVP or with good customer research, outside in thinking, to say, well, if we do this, will a customer want to use it? And so the way you would mitigate risk there is you would start with a better understanding of what those outcomes are from a customer's perspective. And you would use an MVP approach to get there. You would pilot before you spent a lot of money. If you just say, well, we got the money now, let's just jump in and do it, that's not a good way to mitigate the risk. Another way to think about managing risk is to have more shared risk, so that you are willing to give away a little bit of upside for the vendor, for the provider, to protect yourself on the downside. So in other words, you'll pay a little less as a floor, as a base, but you might pay a little more if you achieve an outcome, a result that both sides agree is meaningful and important. So it's not just about risk, it's also about the balance of risk across parties, multi-party risk, and then what the reward structure to mitigate that is. Now look, that's beyond my pay grade. It may be beyond your pay grade as well. It is not beyond the pay grade of the head of sourcing, the head of procurement, the CFO in your organization. So we need to bring them into this conversation. And my promise to you is that my next report in this future work that I'm doing will be about procurement. The title of the report is called Procurement Can Make or Break Your Transformation Success. And I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to go out and talk to lots of people, listen carefully, and try to identify models that help us manage risk in a new way, help us do contracting in a new way to create some of this synergy that is embedded in innovation through ecosystems.
Great. Do you have any tactical examples of how enterprises have started the internal process of creating shared visions of their digital transformation?
Oh, sure, yeah. And I can't talk about lots of specific, case studies here in this call, but we can take it up, offline as appropriate. But in any case, if you think about sort of some of those examples that I used right up front, let's look at State Street, because I mentioned them. So they had to respond to a crisis, which was remote work, but the regulators were not at all interested in that, right? Because the regulators wanted to know that if somebody was managing money, that they were in a protected, safe, secured environment. So how do you get a regulator on board with the fact that that person that used to be going through a double password, protected physical place was now working at home? How would you do that? Well, it was a crisis, and people respond well to crises. They rise up. But in point of fact, the regulators had to be educated as to what the new security mechanisms were and to sign off on them. They had to agree. And so there was a lot of shared responsibility that was way beyond IT, but it was led by IT, because IT is where cyber lives and compliance support using technology lives. So it was a shared responsibility of the chief compliance officer, the CISO, working together to essentially make the pitch. Look, I don't know that this happened at State Street, so don't think this is a case study. It's not, but it's an example of what did happen. Those two people together, one on the business side, if you like, and one on the tech side, came together to go make sure that the regulator was on board. Another example is really embedded in this omni-channel commerce word. For years and years and years, we organized channels as profit centers, revenue centers and profit centers. So you think about Home Depot in days gone by. HomeDepot.com was a different revenue channel, different profit channel than Home Depot stores. Well, that meant you had a disconnected experience. So 10 years ago, they fixed that. They started to create, and actually Walgreens was one of the first ones to do this. They created category profitability that was omni-channel. And instead of having like a battle between the digital people and the store people, you actually had agreement, because customers didn't care. They're bringing their phones into the store and they got to help them. So in B2B, it's been much slower. In B2B selling, we're worried about cannibalizing our direct sale. Direct sales people are worried they're going to lose their jobs because it's all going to be digital e-commerce in B2B. Well, that's not the case. Our data is very, very clear on this, and we help lots and lots of our clients with this to think about what the operating model for B2B selling is, because business customers want to buy digitally as much as they can. The data is shocking on this. They want to talk to somebody as seldom as possible. So how do you create agreement to do omni-channel selling in a B2B environment? Well, look, for decades it didn't happen. COVID made it happen. That's why I use that quote from that manufacturer, because they had no choice. They couldn't get on airplanes. They couldn't go to conferences. to sell, they had to sell digitally, which meant they were reliant on the digital infrastructure, the digital channels to reach and serve their business customers. So they took advantage of them now, in that case, that manufacturer, they took advantage of the energy and the must-do that happened in the spring to change the strategy for omni-channel commerce engagement. So another example, the last one, would be around digital products. So if I don't have a physical product extension opportunity, but I can enhance that physical product with a digital product, right? This has been going on for a long time now. Think about IoT as an example. How do I use that to stimulate transformation in the business, in the operating model, in the way we go to market? And when we've got success around this, where we've got moving from I mentioned transactions like buying coffee, from Nespresso as a per pod, and you instead buy a subscription, you change the model of engagement here. And so from these kind of starting points of product, of customer experience, and really of mandate, have to do it, we have no choice, you get these starting points for really meaningful changes in people's behavior, how they work together, agile, coming together across departmental boundaries. And so those are some examples of it, I think.
I think this one is a good follow-up we have here is, can we maintain this intensity of innovation without a global pandemic?
Yeah. Look, we're all exhausted. Hopefully we get a break. Can we just sleep for a week? I think everybody's exhausted. So, the kind of frantic must-do that we saw back in, March, April, May, that changed over the summer to become a little more practical, but we're still running 100 miles an hour. I'm sure you are as well. So I do think there's going to be a bit of a pause as people kind of get through this next stage, without going too far into that, because I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't even play one on television. But I don't think that, so I don't think we'll have the frantic pace that we've seen, but I do think we're going to see smarter time, smarter money, smarter alignment because of what we've learned. So in other words, instead of working harder, we're going to work smarter. And this is where the strategic partnerships are really important. Because if you've got high trust, if there is transparency, if you've got relationships in place, you can draw on those resources to do the next and the next and the next and the next. And so I think we'll see the same desire, if you like, but it will not be as frantic, if you like, as it was. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. That's what I'm seeing. Lots of our clients are kind of telling us that they're planning for 2021, how they're going to do this. And you see a more measured approach, but you still see the same realization that they can execute differently than they did in the past.
And this looks like the last one here, and then you're off the hook, Ted, is how the reaction to COVID, has the reaction to COVID-19 and the way we are working changed our view of privacy, thinking GDPR, CCPA? Will we see these regulations be modified as work has become more virtual?
Yeah, look, I'm not our expert on privacy and security. I'd really want to refer you to our team, and we have folks look at both sides of it. They look at privacy and they look at compliance and security really hard. My personal opinion, I'm just going to call it that, is that the pandemic hasn't changed that. Really, it's the structural shift in communications and digitization of communications, whether that's media or think about Slack or Teams or something like that. Think about video conferencing, how widely adopted that is. I don't think that changes the regulatory structure at all. I do think that people grow more comfortable with it. And so I think just as you see millennials now morphing into Gen Z and Gen Z morphing into the next one after that, that the approach, the attitude toward personal data, personal privacy continues to change. So I think we will see that continue.
Great. We just have one more slide, Ted, if you could pull that back up.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yep.
And then,
great, perfect.
See, and then another Carla was also asking about your books as well. What were the? Oh, maybe we have one more question here before we get to that, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
COVID has allowed us time to evaluate our MarTech stack. How do you suggest addressing overlapping capabilities and solutions?
Yeah. You're taking me back to the place I love, which is looking at digital experience platforms. All right, so generally speaking, you need to pick your anchor tenants. You need to know what your kind of building blocks are. So for example, you think about customer data, you really want to have a single place for that. That's why the CDP thing is so interesting and important. Single place doesn't have to be a single database, but a single kind of consolidation of effort. Another would be content. You don't want to have multiple content stores. You really don't. You want to be able to consolidate your content stores and use them in multiple places. So in those two areas, for example, you want to pick your anchor tenant. What are your major building blocks? The third one might be, you think about personalization or journey orchestration. You want to have a single engine for that if you can, because you're going to build sort of algorithmic personalization, you're going to build segment-based personalization. You'd like to put that all into a single rules engine or a single algorithmic space. So you're going to consolidate, which means you're going to have to rationalize. Some folks are going to be unhappy. We actually have a whole report on how to do that. If you want to reach out to me independently, I could send it to you. It's about rationalizing your stack. So happy to have that conversation offline.
Great. I think that's it for the questions. But so we did have some next steps outlined, because I know you're thinking that was a great presentation. What do I do next? What can I do next? And we have some answers for you, and we'll send these around afterwards as well. So first, you can read Ted's report, which is this webinar is based off it. It's called "The Pandemic Recession Requires a Digital Response." I'd highly recommend it if you found today's topic interesting, and we'll share that link with you afterwards as well. You can also see what real users are saying about digital experience platforms, what's available, how they compare. And we have the link available to share as well. You can also learn specifically more about Progress Sitefinity and our digital experience platform, and how that can help you grow in 2021. And then lastly, you can take Ted's advice and you can get started. You can contact us at progress.com/company/contact, and let's continue the discussion. But yeah, again, we'll share those links with you as well, so you have them if you'd like to continue to learn more. But that's all we have for today. So thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.